Physics Bites,
a science podcast in English
by the students of Notre Dame.
Hello and welcome again to a new episode of Physics Bites, the English language podcast of the students of Notre Dame here in Paris. Here we have a new episode of our series with our grade 11 students about our mission to the moon. We've already gone through a few of these topics, how to get there, how to move around over there, our habitats. We have 3 new students who are going to talk to us today about energy and maybe a little bit about industry potentially on the moon, but mainly how we can supply ourselves in terms of our needs when it comes to energy, electricity, and all that. So I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves.
So hi, my name is Flore, and I'm in P4.
Right, it's okay. Nobody's going to know which class you're in. That's fine. Okay, this is your first year doing DNL with us. Last year you weren't with us. You came at the end of the year, but you're here with us this year and hopefully next year. Okay.
So I'm Domitille.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in P4 too.
Okay.
It's really important to mention it, and it's my second year.
Yep, your second year doing this as well. And our final student?
And I'm Clara, and I'm in P1, and it's also my second year in DNL physics.
Right, so all 3 of you guys were also students with me last year in physics, outside of the English physics class. So we know how things work now, right? All right, so I'm going to let you guys get started. Let us know a little bit about what you guys talked about, the different aspects of it, and then we'll get into some questions. Okay.
So first of all, we talked about energies on the moon, and we developed 5 ideas.
Mm-hmm.
First, the lunar regolith, then the solar winds, nuclear plants on the moon, and mining on the moon, and the solar panels on the moon.
Right, so those were 5 of the major points that you guys studied and researched as the most viable sources of energy when we're on the moon in order to meet our needs for everything from just living, water, heat, extraction, all these things. Okay. Do you want to go into a little bit of details maybe about a few of them? We'll sort of spread it around and then we'll go and talk to the other ones.
I can talk to you about the solar winds if you want.
Okay, let's start with solar winds. How we can get energy from solar. It was one of the more far-fetched ideas. It was I didn't know anything about it, so go ahead, Flore.
So to start, the solar wind is a hot and fast flow of magnetized gas that streams away from the sun's upper atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
It is made of hydrogen and helium ions with a sparkling of heavier elements.
Right, so it's basically charged particles that are sent out from the sun when there's little explosions on the surface of the sun, and they go all throughout space, and including all the planets and the moon, which would be on its way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, lots of energy?
Lots of energy.
It has a lot of energy, okay.
So the scientists have been searching for a way to recover these energetic particles condensed in the solar winds. That's when 2 scientists from Washington University, Brooke L. Arup and Dirk Schulz-Makush, suggested a new type of satellite capable of collecting these electrons.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a solar wind power satellite, which would rely on a long current carrying copper wire directed toward the sun.
Mm-hmm.
The current would create a magnetic field in concentric circles around the wire. That magnetic field would exert a force known as the Lorentz force on moving charged particles, which in turn would attract electrons toward a metal receiver situated on the wire.
Okay, so the idea being in general that when we have charged particles and they move around, they create electromagnetic fields. And if we have something that's a conductor, like a sort of an antenna, we could sort of harness this electromagnetic energy, this electromagnetic field, and produce energy from it, or at least produce electricity from it. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just ask you a question. So we have solar winds that arrive, if they arrive at the moon, they arrive at Earth as well. How come we can't use this on Earth? What happens to solar winds when they get to Earth?
Well, as you know, the Earth has an atmosphere which is much more present and I don't know, maybe more than on the moon. The moon has
it's for sure
really
that the
weak
atmosphere on the Earth is much more thicker and much more dense.
exactly.
But there's also something else that's very important
Something else?
when it comes. Yeah. What else does the Earth have?
A magnetic field.
Right, the magnetic field. And it's the magnetic field of the Earth that's actually sort of pushing these charged particles. And where do they go, these particles? Because if they reach the Earth, the surface of the Earth, it could be dangerous for us. Maybe Domitille, I think you have an idea.
Maybe, and that's
Right.
the aurora boreal.
Aurora borealis, right?
Aurora
So this is the
borealis,
origin of aurora borealis. And what happens is that these particles, so we have this shield around the Earth, which comes from the magnetic field of the Earth. And so these charged particles arrive in the shield and they're pushed to the poles, right? And when they get there, they're sort of channeled in there and they reach the atmosphere. And when they hit the particles in the atmosphere, they get ionized and they produce energy in the form of light. And what we see on Earth is what we call aurora borealis and australis, which is in the southern pole. Okay. On the moon, there's no atmosphere. There's no magnetic field, so they just slam right into the moon, and now you're talking about how we can maybe get the energy from it in order to actually sort of feed. So how feasible is this as a method of producing energy on the moon? Is it something that theoretically is possible, but we've never tested, or is it something that could realistically, feed the energetic needs of a whole colony?
So this has never been tested before, so it's still theoretical, but on a point of money, it can be realized because it is made of copper, so it's really inexpensive. Sorry, and so in that point of view, it can be made, but it still needs to take form and have some tests.
Okay, so it would be, in terms of the economics of it, very easy to put in place because all you need is really just a good conductor made of copper. That's not a problem, but it hasn't been tested enough to see if it can actually have high enough efficiency to actually produce enough energy there for our needs. Okay, I think you guys also mentioned getting energy from the regolith.
Yes, it was
Domitille.
me. I think it's an interesting idea, and it.
So, just as a reminder, what is regolith?
It's dust, soil, and rock on the moon surface, and the idea is to use it to store energy and heat. Okay.
So, what was the method that you guys came across? This was heat storage bricks. I remember you guys were talking about.
So the idea is that the people who first went on the moon brought back part of it, and so scientists tasted it and replicated it in
in a laboratory setting, right?
Yes, in order to test
a
it.
sort of soil that has the same composition as lunar soil.
Yes.
Okay.
The team then pumped energy into the imitation lunar regolith to see how well it could store heat. And they also connected it to a heat engine to create electricity by using the energy inside it.
So basically, you're saying that they discovered that it has good thermal properties, this sort of soil, and can store a lot of heat. Where would that heat come from? What is it that's heating up the regolith?
The sun.
The sun, right? Because there's no atmosphere. There's lots of energy coming from the sun. And also, what's so special about the moon and its rotation that helps with the heating of the...
But there's a part that is always... no.
Well, because its rotation is much more slow, there are parts of it which are exposed to the sun for like a long period, so they can sort of get a lot of heat into it. Okay, so this is one method we've actually tested on the Earth as well.
Yes.
By reproducing this. Okay. Clara, which aspect of the energy research did you work on?
I worked on nuclear plants. On the moon. So the nuclear energy is one of the least polluting energy invented by man.
Right.
And one of those we understand the most.
Yeah, we've used the most on Earth already,
yes.
right? So there's no testing, it's already been tested.
Yes. So putting it on the moon doesn't seem so out of reach or unreasonable, but the only question is how do we do it?
Right, because the idea is that a nuclear plant, like the ones we have on Earth, are pretty complex. They're sophisticated. How would we actually produce something like that on the moon where we don't have like any of the tools that we have already? So what solutions did you find?
So the NASA and the DEO, so the Department of Energy, have been working on putting nuclear power on the moon by 2031, and potentially provide future Mars colonists with tons of reliable electricity. But implanting huge reactors, as we have in France, for example, is impossible. That's why in November 2021, NASA and the DOE solicited proposal from US companies for mini reactors concept theoretically capable of generating nuclear power on the moon.
Right. So the difference being that the nuclear plants we use, for example, in France, which are the majority of our energy, are these giant plants with like many reactors, 3-4 reactors, and here you're talking about something small enough that we sort of build on Earth and then we take it over there and just put it in place?
Yes.
Okay. I suppose there's some dangers involved in that?
Yes.
Can you think of any dangers with sending a nuclear power plant, even if it's a small or modular one in a spaceship, up to the moon?
Like with the radioactive? No, it can be.
Well, if there's an accident,
Yes.
then we're just going to spread radioactive stuff right into the atmosphere, right? That's one of the dangers, but I am sure that there are ways of mitigating that. You also mentioned that these would be different from reactors on Earth because on Earth we need water to cool down our reactors, right?
Yes.
So how do we fix that problem if we don't have any water on the moon, or not a lot of it? Any solutions? Any of you guys? There's lots of silent communication going on.
The temperature on the moon is like cold, so it would cool the reactors.
Maybe. I mean, the part of the moon that's not facing the sun would be very cold. It would be about minus 160, 170 degrees.
Yeah.
But we're talking about cooling inside the reactor, right? So we would need some sort of reactors which don't use water, basically.
Yes. We found a way. Like we read an article that said that the lab where the mini reactors would be created has been leading the way in the US on advanced reactors. Some of them micro reactors and others that can operate without water for cooling. So water-cooled nuclear reactors are the vast majority of reactors
that we have on Earth currently, yeah.
So
we do have the technology for non-water-based reactors. We have stuff with molten salt and stuff like that, which are actually pretty efficient. It's just that they're very complex. So here, I guess the problem would be, how do we build something that is efficient enough to produce energy on the moon and then fix the problem of sending it? Because when you send something in a rocket, it goes through. Like, remember last week when the guys were talking about the fish eggs, right? And one of the things that they tested was the vibrations, right? Because during liftoff, there's a lot of force, a lot of vibrations, and you have something that's very complex mechanically and technically. If it's subjugated to all these vibrations, it could completely destroy it, or at least pose a danger, right? So the question would be, how do we get it up there? Or maybe there's a way of sending pieces up there and then we just assemble it together.
I think it would be more this way.
So
then sending it
take it up
already,
piece by piece and then sort of
construct it,
which has its own difficulties in terms of I guess you need more trips, you need a way of putting things together on the moon. Any cost numbers on these things? I think you mentioned something about how much the research has put the cost at.
On these mini reactors, I don't, but we have at the end an economic part.
Okay, so we'll come back to it later?
Yes.
Okay, it sounds good to me. Flore, do you want to talk about solar energy on the moon? Because you also talked about that, right?
So another idea that we had was to maybe take the energy that comes from the sun, because as you may know, the moon receives just as much sun as much sun as the Earth does.
As much sunlight.
Yeah, sunlight.
Yeah.
Sorry. So this energy would be used on solar panels, which are used to absorb the sun's rays and convert them into electricity or heat.
Okay.
So it's something that has already been done on the Earth, so it wouldn't be complex to put in on the moon. Maybe it would be costly, however, and not
depending on the size, I guess, of the installation, right?
And we might need big solar panels to produce a lot of energy. Also, it might not be really sustainable because we might have to change the solar panels.
Right. So there's a few issues with the solar panels. So for one thing, on the Earth, solar panels are exposed to sunlight that heats them up to maybe 30, 40, 50 degrees, right? Or maybe not higher than maybe 60 or 70 degrees in like warm regions. On the surface of the moon, they're going to be exposed to a lot more energy, right? Do all solar panels work the same based on the energy of the sunlight that comes on them? Because I think there's a curve, I remember reading somewhere, where the amount of energy that it produces is proportional to the amount of sunlight that comes on there. And after a certain amount of energy, it just doesn't work well. Unless you change the materials, right?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I can see Esteban giving me a nodding look far in the distance in the classroom, but okay. And the other problem would be we have to transport the panels because we can't actually build it up there, right?
Yeah.
But I guess that's a recurring theme, is that we can't build anything on the moon, so you have to take stuff, and that's what's costly. Would it be a viable method of producing energy long term with solar panels on the moon?
Well, no, because as I said, maybe it's not something sustainable. So we would have to change them. They are not infinite. I mean,
they don't have a lifetime that's very long.
I don't know if they work on a battery or something, but I know if they do, you have to change it, and that might cost a lot because you have to change the battery on the Earth, I think. So it's complicated that way too.
Okay. So it's one possibility. I start to get the feeling that there's no ideal solution. We're going to have a mix of solutions, you know.
Yeah, we thought about that, and one of the best idea we thought was maybe mining on the moon.
Right. Okay. Do you want to go into that a bit, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go into mining on the moon.
So we know that the action of solar wind has released high energy particles for billions of years, including helium-3, which is a light isotope of helium. And the idea is to create a reaction of fusion between helium-3 and deuterium, with the advantage of not producing any neutrons. And helium-3 is really interesting because it is the only resource that is very abundant on the moon because there is no atmosphere. So it doesn't burn up as it reaches the Earth.
Right.
And it's still in its experimental stages because even on Earth we haven't done a fusion reaction yet.
No, not a long-term sustained reaction.
Yes, even if we're working on it. And so it would be a good way of producing energy in a big quantities, and we think it's a good idea if we can make it work.
So now we're talking basically about the idea that what are the advantages of being on the moon? What are the advantages of having a colony on there? Is that we'll have access to a sort of resource that we have a lot of difficulty finding on Earth.
Yes. And
having access to this resource gives us new ways of producing energy, which would be much more difficult on Earth, right? However, I would imagine that fusion, given how difficult it is on Earth to do, it would be just as difficult to do on the moon, maybe.
Yes.
But another recurring theme that I'm hearing is that from you guys and the other groups is that there's lots of resources in solar soil, in lunar soil. There's lots of stuff. Last week we were hearing about how much water and oxygen there is in there. Now you guys are telling me we can get some helium-3, which could be useful for a lot of things. So it seems like the main resource on the moon is going to be just the dust, right? And if we can get stuff out of it. Let me see. Were there any other methods of producing energy that we haven't talked about yet that you guys brought up?
So there is some things that we didn't mention, but
coming back to the idea of solar panels as a source of energy.
Yes.
Okay.
So there was an idea that was developed by scientists, and it would be something called the lunar ring. It's a concept where you could be established solar panels all around the equator of the moon, and it would collect the sunlight all the time, like 24 hours on 24 hours.
Right, because at any given moment, some part of the ring would be exposed to sunlight.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if we just put like a little patch of solar panels somewhere, well, during the rotation of the moon and orbit of the moon around the Earth, at some point it's going to be in the dark. So, and you gave me two solutions about that. Two ways we can produce energy from solar panels continuously. One was this ring idea, and what was the other one?
The other one was to put solar panels on the poles.
Right.
Because
one of the poles.
Yeah, one of the poles, because the axis of the moon is less tilted than the axis on the Earth, so it is always receiving sunlight.
Right. Basically, one of the poles of the moon is constantly in sunlight, and there's no time where it's not exposed. So it would be constantly receiving sunlight, so it can constantly produce electricity from it. Okay. I thought the ring idea was good. I guess that would be difficult to build just because of the size of it, right? And the amount of solar panels that would require for this. But and the other thing that you guys, I think, mentioned was the idea of that if we build a colony, we want it to be on the side of the moon that's facing the Earth.
Yes,
which means that the other side of the moon, which is never facing the Earth, would be ideal for solar panels.
Yes, because we think that maybe it could have an impact on the mind of the people that live in the colony.
Right, that to be able to see the Earth constantly and not be looking into the deep depths of space and darkness and nothingness.
So if we do some more research and we find out that it is not possible to put people on the hidden face of the moon, as we call it, we could just establish solar panels all over. It's big, but it would. So they won't be receiving sunlight all the time, but it's an option.
Right. At least it's not space that we are counting on using potentially if we get there. But then again, I think the problem with electricity, whether it's on the moon or on the Earth, is as much dependent on how we produce electricity as it is on how we're able to store it. So battery technology and all these things that we've been talking about all these years. Okay. So maybe we can move on to some of the economic side of things, because you guys did a part of your research, or have we forgotten something? Is there anything
maybe talking about the industry first.
Right, okay.
Is more interesting.
Okay.
Because we talked about how the moon is full of resources, and one of the industry part is we saw how to send this energy to the Earth.
Yeah.
By the
So, maybe we can move on to talking about some of the economic aspects of just the whole endeavor of making a colony on the moon, going there and all these things, because you guys looked into it a bit. It's very difficult, I think, to estimate, but you guys had some numbers, I remember, in your presentation. So do you want to go into that, Clara?
Yes, indeed. Like when you're thinking of colonizing the moon, obviously you think of money and how much will it cost. And so many questions we ask ourselves, like how to make it cheaper, how we would finance it, all of this.
Or is it even possible?
Yes, or
to
is it
raise
feasible?
The money to do something like this, yeah.
Yes. So obviously it would cost lots of money, $1 trillion of US dollar actually. But reaching the moon would cost about 10 billion, like first. Yeah. It's an estimate range that I made.
You mean just like one trip properly, like, to go there with a proper rocket and land people and stuff?
No, not with people, but only like the rocket.
Okay.
Just the rocket.
Just the rocket. Just the rocket. 10 billion just for that.
Yes.
Just gone up into
So
smoke. Okay.
reaching the moon, so it's 10 billion. It's an estimate range that I made for 7 billion to 13 billion dollars.
Right, so I'll take the average there.
With an additional 28 billion to approximately 52 billion being spent on the construction of the base-related structures of this rocket.
Right.
And thus, we start with approximately $62 billion. Which
let's just round it up to 100.
Yes,
right? 100 billion just to get there. Okay.
Yes, so it's it's a lot. It's like an extravagant number. And NASA told us that it would be 4.1 billion per 4-person flight, so which is 1,025 million, sorry.
To send one person.
Yes, for one astronaut.
That's an expensive astronaut, huh?
Yes, but in 2020, NASA scientists have figured out a new way to reach the moon using a gravity assist.
Oh.
So if a mission is on a tight budget but not on a so tight timeline, one of the cheaper options is to send the spacecraft into high Earth orbit. Have it swing around the planet.
Which is something we know to do easily. We have commercial companies doing this, like SpaceX and Blue Origin, all these things. So it's something that's much more cost friendly.
Yes.
Okay, just to send it to high orbit.
And so
send it up into upper atmosphere, high orbit, swing around the Earth.
And then use that momentum to slingshot it toward the moon.
Okay.
So it's a maneuver called a gravity assist.
Okay. And the idea there would be that it's much less costly because we're using less fuel.
Yes.
And we're letting gravity sort of do its own work. But it will take longer because the speeds will be less.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the scientists for that maneuver had a budget of $150 million,
which is nothing.
Yes, with the.
It's like a tenth of an astronaut.
Yes, if we take the number that we said before, this 150 million is not enough usually for this kind of project. However, they succeeded by launching their spacecraft on the far side of the moon.
Okay.
And so they already succeeded with a microwave-sized spacecraft. So
you're saying we've actually tested this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So why wouldn't they succeed with a normal-sized spacecraft if we already succeeded with a microwave-sized one?
Okay, so we've proven the concept. We just haven't tested it at a size which is actually what we would be using for an actual trip to the moon.
Yes.
Okay.
It would eventually be much longer, so because of the size of the spacecraft, but it's feasible and maybe less. It would not cost 150 million because of the size of the spacecraft, but it would be
much less.
It would be much less than $100 billion. That we said.
But in any case, I think if we wanted to think realistically about a long-term project, going to the moon, staying on the moon, building a colony on the moon, going back and forth, we're talking even more than hundreds of billions.
Yes.
We're talking about thousands of billions, trillions.
Yes.
There's no one country that could actually pay that, right?
No. So nowadays, NASA gets its budget from the Congress of the White House, as NASA is under the Directorate of the United States of America. Which spends most of its money on its space programs, with a total of $62 billion in 2022.
Okay.
And so for our project of colonizing the moon, the USA will have to pay for it, obviously, but also several other countries, and especially the most developed ones, and the ones with the highest GDP, if you want to be logical.
So it would have to be an international project. There's no other way of doing something like this.
Yes, if only one country put all its money, it won't be feasible, or it would be like a little colony, like
right,
only
it'd be too
10
small
people.
scale.
It will not be like the right amount of people that we want, but like maybe not even.
It wouldn't be a colony; it would be a camp.
1/5 of it. So.
Right. Okay. So it'd be a lunar camp and not a lunar colony.
Yes, exactly.
All right. I think we've pretty much talked about most of the stuff that you guys brought up. I guess the financial or the economic question is way too complex, I think, to get into it, but much like the other stuff. So is there anything else you guys want to add? Is there any little bits and pieces that you guys found during your research that you want to share with us? What you mentioned earlier.
We talk about the economy and how much it would cost, and one way to pay back all that money would be to sell on the Earth the energy that we would send from the moon.
Right. So now we're sort of going a bit further into the future. The idea is that we have a sort of a colony there. We're able to do some sort of mining, take advantage of what is unique with the moon, which would be something like, for example, the helium stuff that you're talking about, as well as the abundant energy that we could potentially get from either mining, extraction, or from like solar panels. And the idea is, how do we maybe we would have a surplus, and we're going to send some of that to Earth, where we always need energy, right? So go ahead.
And so the idea would be to transform the energy into a laser beam, and to send this laser beam to the Earth, and the laser beam would then be transformed in the structure.
Right. So the idea is that we convert that energy into energy can be transported by this very high intensity laser.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's something that we already know a little bit about, because we already have projects. For example, the Japanese have built satellites that they sent into space where it can produce energy from solar panels and then sort of send it back to Earth with lasers or microwave beams. Did you have some stuff that you wanted to develop on that?
Yes, so to be more precise, the idea would be to convert the power coming from the sun into microwave laser beams, and then transmit it to the Earth. And the stable energy from the sun would be converted via lunar solar cells, and the electricity would be transmitted via a power cable. And the laser beam would be transmitted to a power grid, and converted either into electricity or hydrogen,
another form of energy,
and energy storage.
Right. So it's much more advanced in terms of what we can do. But the idea is that instead of, you can use the moon as like a giant satellite which produces energy, which is always in a position where we can predict, and we're just going to send that back down to Earth. Okay. I guess the difficulty with that would be, how do you send it? Because the movement of the Earth compared to the moon, it would have to send to different points, right? So, but those are, I guess, problems that we have to deal with once we've...
Yes, and if all the countries are pay for the colonization of the moon, they would all have a
share of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add, or I think we've pretty much touched on everything you guys brought up in your presentation. I'll just ask you guys one final question. How did you guys find the topic? It's not an easy topic to research. I ask that every time. How did you find it? Did you find it interesting? Was there anything specific that you found particularly striking when you were doing your research?
The energy part was really interesting. Yeah. I thought more than the industry and economic part.
I think because there's more research maybe done into it, and it's much more applicable to problems on Earth, right? Flore, did you have anything that you found particularly interesting?
We thought about it too, because people already took the subject, the basic subject, like how to hit on the moon, how to live on the moon, like the colony itself. So we thought about something a little bit more original, and it's something we don't think about it, but the energy is in our life every day. We consume energy in everything we do, so it's really important. And I think that when you think of a colony on the moon, you don't think of the energy,
right?
But as Domitille said, it's really interesting, and you have lots of ways to try and make energy.
Well, in the same way as when we think about like human cities and countries and colonies on Earth, we don't think about the infrastructure that's necessary for it to work, water pipes, sewage, energy, but without it there is no civilization, there's no city, there's no structure. It would be the same on the moon. Clara, I'll ask you a different question. So if you had to just make a final pronouncement on the whole thing, would you say that it's actually possible to produce energy in a feasible way, given all that you guys researched on the moon, or are you not convinced by it too much?
It is a good question, because
I always ask good questions.
With all the energy that we have said in this presentation, it would be feasible, but it also extremely complicated to do it because of all the...
So not all of the projects are sustainable in the long term. So it would depend on which projects we decide to
invest in and really develop.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you guys. It was a very, very interesting topic, like you guys said yourself. A lot of interesting things to look into and look at. I think you guys did a pretty good job. So thank you very much.
Thank you.